SS2 biology, and the topic is respiratory system. Just like you have done respiratory system in your primary school, you have also done it in junior secondary, but this is now senior secondary respiratory system. Just like when you ask anybody like in primary school, what is respiration, they'll just tell you that you breathe in oxygen and out carbon dioxide. No, this is not the type for your level. So respiration can be defined as the biochemical activity of the cells in which glucose is broken down by a series of reactions controlled by enzymes to release energy, carbon dioxide, and water vapor. And we have two types of respiration. We have aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration. Aerobic respiration is the type that requires oxygen. That means that without oxygen, that type of respiration cannot take place. And that is the type of respiration that is found in both plants and animals. And we also have anaerobic respiration. This is the type of respiration that takes place in the absence of oxygen. That means that oxygen is not required. Just like in plants, that is what leads to the production of alcohol. And then in the case of animals, it's just like if you are being told to run and you have not been doing that type of exercise before, you see that after some time you have a muscle pull. What actually happens is just that since you are not used to that type of activity, that means that your legs, the cells of your legs has been starved of oxygen, so it's now respiring anaerobically. And what you'll be told by your physical education teacher is just that they'll just tell you that you start panting. That means that you're not taking enough oxygen, because in the case of animals, during anaerobic respiration cannot produce alcohol. You're taking oxygen until the cells now have enough oxygen. We also have the phases and stages of respiration. When you talk about stages and phases, that's when you talk about external respiration and internal respiration. External respiration is just the type of respiration that takes place between the environment and the respiratory organ. And also internal respiration, you have done it in SS1. That is what takes place in the process. That is also called tissue respiration, and that is what takes place during glycolysis, and all that is a Krebs cycle. But that's not what we're going to do today. What we're going to do today is the mechanism of respiration in organisms, that means in living organisms. And I'm going to start with amoeba. Just like amoeba, for example, amoeba uses its body surface. What happens is just that amoeba is always found inside water. So oxygen is always diffusing inside. You all know that amoeba is a unicellular organism, so it is very, very small. So it doesn't even require any respiratory organ. So it just uses its body surface. That means that oxygen diffuses inside and carbon dioxide diffuses outside. I want to draw it. So this is the mechanism of respiration in amoeba. Amoeba uses its body surface because it is very, very small. So oxygen diffuses inside and carbon dioxide diffuses outside. This arrow is just showing how oxygen diffuses inside. So it just uses its body surface. And we also have organisms and their respiratory organ or system. Just like we have amoeba. Amoeba uses its body surface. We have Hydra. Hydra uses the cell membrane. And then we also have earthworm. Earthworm uses the wet skin or body surface. That's why you observe that, like this season now, we are in dry season. If you take maybe if you are digging the soil and you see earthworm and you just place it outside, it continues, the body continues to lose water. What happens is just that the earthworm dies. Why does it die? Because the surface is no longer wet and oxygen cannot diffuse on the wet surface. So the earthworm naturally dies. And then in the case of arthropods, example is the insects, they use spiracles. The spiracles are found on the abdomen. They are just small, small openings that leads into the tracheal system. And then we have the arachnida. An example is spider. They use long books. If you look at it, it looks like books, and that is what they use. And then the fishes uses the gills. And then we have the tadpole. The tadpole is just the young of amphibian. It uses the gills also. And then we also have the amphibians. An example is the frog. It uses the skin, the mouth, and also the lungs. And we also have the reptiles. An example is we have the snake. We also have the common lizard. And then it also uses the lungs. We also have the birds. The birds also, those are apes. An example is the birds, just like we have the common hen. And then it uses the lungs. And then man also uses the lungs. That is how the lungs looks like. And then we also have the plants. The plants uses the stomata and lenticels. So that is organisms and their respiratory organ or system. I'll now go to mechanism of respiration. Like in the case of amoeba uses the body surface. So what happens is just that oxygen just diffuses inside and carbon dioxide diffuses outside. It's just through simple diffusion. And then we have that of the insects. Like the insect, for example, what happens is just that they have the spiracles. The spiracles are just small openings that are found on the abdomen, and then they always open into the tracheal system. And then the tracheal system also extends, just spreads extensively throughout the cells of the insect, so that it's able to get enough oxygen. And then we also have for the amphibians. For the fishes uses the gills. You all know the gills and the operculum. Just like we have your tilapia. The tilapia is just the common fish that is found throughout Nigeria. Even if you have not seen the tilapia before, you have seen the normal freshwater fish. And then what happens is just that when you see the fish opening his mouth and then closing his operculum, or closing his mouth and opening his operculum, what is happening is just that dissolved oxygen is entering through the mouth and coming out through the operculum. And in the case of amphibians, the young of amphibian is called the tadpole, and then the tadpole uses the gills. At the early stage of the tadpole, it has external gills. So as it's moving inside the water, oxygen is always diffusing inside and carbon dioxide is diffusing outside. And then we also have, in the case of the amphibians uses the skin, uses the mouth, and also uses the lungs. When it uses the mouth is also called buccal respiration. That means that what happens is just that it closes up its nostrils and then it opens up its mouth, and oxygen and air containing the soft oxygen enters into the mouth cavity. And then the mouth cavity now is, since the animal is still small, and then the mouth also is very large. It has a large surface area, so oxygen is able to diffuse inside the mouth and to all the cells of the amphibian, that is the toad or the frog. And then we also have, in the case of skin, the skin it can also respire through the skin, also called cutaneous respiration. When it's in the case of the skin, what happens is just that it closes his mouth, and then it also closes his nostrils, and then it now uses his body for respiration, because the body also extends, there are blood vessels that extend extensively throughout the body. So oxygen is able to diffuse into the wet surface of the skin, and then carbon dioxide now diffuses out. And then in the case of we have the lungs, that is pulmonary respiration, because it has the lungs too that it can use for respiration. And then what happens is just that when it wants to use the lung, what it does is just that it raises its buccal cavity, that's in the case of the frog, and then also it opens its nostrils to allow air containing oxygen to just go inside, that is from the mouth to the larynx, from the larynx to the pharynx, from the pharynx to the trachea, from the trachea to the tracheals, and finally to the alveoli, where exchange of gases now takes place. And then in the case of the reptiles, it's still the same thing, uses the lungs. And then in the case of man also uses the lungs. We also have conditions necessary for respiration to take place. That means that before respiration can take place, what are the conditions that must be satisfied? We have respiratory surface, we have respiratory organ, we have ventilation. That means that if there's no respiratory surface, that means that nothing is happening. Just like we have the lungs in man, you have gills in the fishes. And then if there's no ventilation, just like I'm inside a classroom like this, let's assume we close all the windows and there's no entry of air. You notice that after some time, what happens? The person will just die. Why? Because you use up all the oxygen and then it will now remain the carbon dioxide. And then the moment you just breathe in carbon dioxide, it kills the cells immediately and the person dies. So ventilation is just when you have the oxygen being replaced always. That means as I'm taking in oxygen now, carbon dioxide is coming out. And then since the windows are opening, the carbon dioxide, there's always ventilation. That means the air that is inside the classroom is always being renewed. That's why you see that maybe if there's a concert and then the place is not very well ventilated, you just notice that people will just start dying. We also have the transport medium. That means that there must be a transport medium. A transport medium in the sense that when the oxygen enters inside the body, what takes it to all the cells? That is in the case of the blood vessels. So it's the blood vessels that takes it to all the cells. We also have characteristics of respiratory surfaces. That means that for a surface to be able to carry out respiration, what are just the conditions that must be satisfied? It must be moist, it must be thin-walled, it must be permeable, it must be highly vascularized. That means that it must be highly supplied with blood vessels. And then it must also have a transport medium. That means like the blood must be there to just take it. Because the moment it is not there, that means that it's not possible for any respiration to take place. That's why you see that, let's say like this season now, Harmattan is just starting. You see that by January, most of the time, just, oh, give me water. I want to put it in my nostrils because it's very dried. You feel it. You see that you'll not be able to respire very well. So what happens now is that I'm going to the mechanism of respiration in man. In the case of mechanism of respiration in man, that means that how air enters through the nostrils, goes to the lungs, and then carbon dioxide now comes outside. What happens is just that you open your nostrils, the air enters through the nostrils. It goes to the pharynx. The pharynx is found at the back of the mouth. From the pharynx to the larynx, from the larynx to the trachea, from the trachea to the tracheals, and then finally to the alveoli. And then the alveoli also, exchange of gases is able to take place because the alveoli is moist. The alveoli has a large surface area. The alveoli is thin-walled. The alveoli is permeable. The alveoli also is highly vascularized. And then also because the alveoli is just like the capillaries. That is actually where the arteries and the veins are found. You can see this is the alveoli. And then like this one now, it has the trachea. The trachea now divides extensively into the tracheals and then the tracheals into the alveoli. This is just an example of the alveoli. You see, that's why you see that when you talk about the lungs, if you have followed your parents to the market, you see that the lungs is just like a foam. Like it has air spaces inside. The air spaces are actually where the alveoli is found. And then you can see the arteries and the veins, and that is where exchange of carbon dioxide and oxygen takes place. And then when it has dropped the oxygen, it will now take the carbon dioxide that is from the alveoli through the tracheals, from the tracheals through the trachea, from the trachea to the larynx. The larynx is also called the voice box, and then to the pharynx, and finally comes out through the nose. So that is how exchange of air takes place inside the human. Mechanism of respiration. That means when you talk about the chest cavity, how it increases in volume or decreases, and also the diaphragm. Just like from this my diagram now, what happens is just that during breathing in, the diaphragm is just like a membrane, and then it separates the abdominal cavity into two unequal parts. During breathing in, the diaphragm just becomes flat, and then the chest cavity also increases in volume, and also the intercostal muscles also relaxes. That means to just allow the chest cavity to come out. That's why you see that most of the time, just like when you watch all these horror films, you know, when they want to kill somebody that is sleeping, they'll take a pillow and just press down the chest. What is happening is just that they don't allow, you know, nobody touches your nostrils, and then you can still allow air to come inside. But what is happening by pressing down the chest, they will not allow the lungs to be able to increase in size. That means that they will not allow increase in the abdominal cavity. So even though your mouth is opened, your nostrils also are opened, but there will be no increase in the size of the lungs. That means that air containing dissolved oxygen will not be able to diffuse inside. So during breathing in, what happens is just that the diaphragm just becomes flat, and then the abdominal, the chest region also increases in volume. That is just to allow the lungs to be able to increase in size, and then also allow air containing dissolved oxygen to go inside, so that by the time it gets to the alveoli, and then the alveoli also, exchange of gases cannot take place because the alveoli is permeable, it is moist, it is thin-walled, it is highly vascularized, and then it's also highly supplied with blood vessels. So exchange of gases can now take place. And then during breathing out, what happens is just that the diaphragm now assumes its normal dome shape. That means that this can't show it, and then it now becomes dome shape, and then what happens is just that intercostal muscles now contracts, and then also the thoracic cavity also decreases in volume. So respiration can be defined as the biochemical activity of the cells in which glucose is broken down by a series of reactions controlled by enzymes to release energy, carbon dioxide, and water vapor. And we have two types of respiration. We have aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration. Aerobic respiration is the type that requires oxygen. That means that without oxygen, no respiration. And then in the case of anaerobic respiration, it does not require oxygen. And then we also have the stages or phases of respiration. That's when we talk about internal respiration and external respiration. Internal respiration is just the exchange of gases just between the respiratory organ and also the respiratory, the environment, like breathing in oxygen and out carbon dioxide. And then the second one is internal respiration. That's the type that is also called tissue respiration. And then you have done that in SS1. That is during the process of glycolysis and Krebs cycle. And then we also have conditions necessary for respiration to take place. That means that before respiration takes place, what are the conditions that must be satisfied? We have, there must be a respiratory organ. That means that without the respiratory organ, it's just like when you take the fishes now and then you remove the gills. What happens? The fish will not be able to respire again. Or when you take maybe a lizard, for example, and then you now remove the lungs, it will not be able to respire again. What happens is just that it will just die because the cells are going to be starved of oxygen. And then when it's starved of oxygen for some time, it dies. And then we also have ventilation. There must be ventilation. Ventilation is just like renewing the air. what happens is just that it will just take away the carbon dioxide and bring the new oxygen. That's why you see that if you take a bottle now, you now put insect inside and then you close the bottle, it will take some time before it dies. Why? Because it continues to use up the oxygen and release carbon dioxide. Then after some time, when the oxygen has been used up, it will just die. That's why ventilation is very, very necessary. That's why also, if you buy your goat, this is Christmas period, if you buy your goat or you buy your chicken, for example, they will tell you that do not keep it inside a closed place, and also do not keep it inside your boot, because if you keep it inside your boot, by the time you get home, you see that it has died. Why? Because there's no ventilation. We also have respiratory surface. That means that there must be a surface through which oxygen can diffuse and carbon dioxide also can diffuse out. And then a respiratory surface is just like in the case of the gills, we have the filament, and then in the case of the lungs, we have the alveoli. Without the respiratory surface, there will be nothing like respiration taking place. We also have the transport medium. That means that there must be a medium that takes the oxygen from the alveoli to other parts of the cells of the body, and then that also brings it back. And then we also have characteristics of respiratory surfaces. That means that before a surface, respiration can take place there. That means this, it must have all these characteristics. It must be permeable, it must be moist, it must have a large surface area, it must be thin-walled, it must be highly vascularized, and also it must also have a transport medium. That means that without the transport medium, that means that no respiration will take place. And then I'll now go to, we have organism and their respiratory organ or system. Unicellular organism, an example is amoeba. It uses its body surface. We have hydra and also tapeworm. It uses the cell membrane. And then we have earthworm. Earthworm uses the wet skin or body surface. We have arthropods. Arthropods uses, an example is insect, uses spiracles. We have arachnids. That's the spider. It uses the long beaks. And then we have the fishes, uses the gills. We have tadpoles, that is the young of a frog or a toad. It uses the gills. And then we have amphibians, that is the toad or the frog. It uses the skin, the mouth, or the lungs. And then we have the reptiles, uses the lungs. We have apes, an example is we have eagle, it uses the lungs. And then we have man, man uses the lungs. And then we also have, that means we also have plants. Plants uses stomata and lenticels. That is the end of today's lesson. Until we meet again, good day.